They were told not to return. Not because the mission was dangerous, but because survival was no longer part of the plan. In the final months of World War II, Japanese fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits with a single instruction that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years earlier. If you cannot shoot the bomber down, crash into it. This was not a myth. This was not propaganda. This was Japan's last air defense. And the moment this order was given, the Pacific Air War had already been decided. By 1945, the sky above Japan had become a battlefield the nation could no longer control. Every day, American B-29 Superfortresses crossed the horizon, silver, high-flying, untouchable. They came in waves, flying higher than most Japanese fighters could easily reach, faster than many could intercept, and armed with enough defensive firepower to shred anything that lingered too long. At first, Japan had prepared for this moment. Before the war, Japanese air doctrine emphasized speed, maneuverability, and elite pilot skill. Aircraft like the Zero were unmatched in agility early on, and Japanese pilots were among the most rigorously trained in the world. But wars evolve faster than doctrine. And by the time the B-29 arrived over Japan, everything that once made Japanese air power formidable was being slowly stripped away. To understand why pilots were ordered to ram bombers, we need to rewind, just slightly. In 1943, American planners unveiled a weapon designed not just to bomb Japan, but to make its defenses obsolete. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was unlike anything the world had seen. It could fly higher than most interceptors, farther than escort fighters, and carry heavier bomb loads across vast distances. It was pressurized. It was fast. It was bristling with machine guns controlled by analog computers. And most critically, it could operate from bases beyond Japan's reach. By late 1944, B-29s were operating from the Mariana Islands. For the first time, Japan itself was within sustained bombing range. The war had come home. At first, Japan responded the only way it knew how. Interceptor squadrons scrambled. Fighters climbed desperately to altitude. Anti-aircraft guns fired until their barrels glowed red. But the results were grim. Japanese aircraft engines struggled at high altitude. Fuel shortages meant pilots trained less and flew fewer hours. Replacement pilots were rushed through programs that once took years. Meanwhile, American crews gained experience with every mission. The imbalance grew wider with every month. Then came the turning point. In early 1945, Japan's Air Defense Command faced a brutal reality. Traditional interception was failing. Too many fighters were being shot down before reaching firing range. Too many pilots were being lost for too few bombers destroyed. And the bombers kept coming. So commanders turned to desperation. They revived a concept that had existed on the fringes of doctrine, but had never been formalized. Aerial ramming. The idea was brutally simple. If a fighter could not bring down a bomber with guns, it would aim for the tail, wing, or cockpit, and destroy it through collision. This was not suicide in the ceremonial sense. Pilots were not guaranteed to die. Some survived after bailing out or crash landing. But survival was no longer the priority. Stopping the bomber was. Special ramming units were formed. Aircraft were modified, guns removed to reduce weight, armor stripped away. Pilots were briefed not on return procedures, but on where to hit the bomber for maximum effect. Wings, tail sections, cockpits. This was no longer air combat as a duel. It was a last stand. And then came the day it all collided, literally. On one mission over Japan, a lone American B-29 found itself swarmed by interceptors. Fighters attacked from all directions, firing until ammunition ran dry. Then, one by one, they closed the distance. One fighter smashed into the bomber's wing. Another tore into its tail. Inside the B-29, chaos erupted. Fires burned. Control surfaces failed. Crew members fought to keep the aircraft level as alarms screamed. But astonishingly, the bomber stayed airborne. Even after multiple ramming strikes, even after sustained damage, the Superfortress limped away. And the Japanese fighters were gone. Moments like this exposed the truth no one in Tokyo wanted to admit. Ramming tactics were not a sign of strength. They were a confession. A confession that Japan no longer had the fuel to sustain prolonged air battles. That it no longer had the pilots to replace losses. That it no longer had the time. Every ramming attack destroyed not just an aircraft, but a trained pilot Japan could not afford to lose. And still, the bombers kept coming. For the pilots ordered into these missions, the emotional weight was immense. Many were teenagers. Some had barely finished training. They wrote farewell letters before takeoff, not because they were told to die, but because they understood the odds. Some believed they were defending their families below. Others followed orders out of duty. Some later admitted fear, doubt, and confusion. This was not fanaticism alone. It was exhaustion. From the American side, these encounters were equally shocking. Bomber crews had trained for fighters, flak, and damage control, but not for aircraft deliberately aiming to collide with them. After-action reports described the horror of seeing a fighter line up and refuse to break away. Yet even this tactic failed to turn the tide. The B-29's design, redundant systems, multiple engines, reinforced structures, often allowed damaged bombers to survive impacts that should have been fatal. What was meant to be a last defense instead revealed just how unstoppable the bombing campaign had become. By the summer of 1945, Japan's air defense was effectively shattered. Fuel reserves were nearly gone. Radar coverage was patchy. Fighter units existed mostly on paper. Ramming attacks continued sporadically, but they no longer slowed the inevitable. The skies belonged to the bombers, and beneath them, Japanese cities burned. When the war ended, the ramming orders quietly disappeared. There were no victory parades for those squadrons. No monuments celebrating the tactic. It was an episode many preferred to forget, on both sides. But it matters, because it marks the precise moment when a modern nation acknowledged that its technological and industrial capacity had been exhausted. When courage could no longer compensate for material reality. Japan's last air defense was not defined by a single battle or aircraft. It was defined by a decision that revealed how wars are not only won by bravery or sacrifice, but by logistics, production, and adaptation. By the time pilots were ordered to crash into bombers, the outcome of the Pacific War was already written in the sky. The ramming attacks did not change the course of history. They confirmed it. And today, when we look back at those final air battles, we are reminded of a sobering truth. When nations run out of options, they ask individuals to become the weapon. The echoes of that decision still linger, high above the Pacific, where the last defenders rose to meet an enemy they could no longer stop. If you enjoy cinematic stories about forgotten turning points and the human side of history, consider subscribing to the channel. Because history isn't just about who won. It's about the moments when everything fell apart, and the people who were there when it did.